Hi, my name's Rowena. My family handed me an apron at my brother's birthday and erased me from every memory they captured that day. But worse than being left out was realizing they'd been quietly pushing me out of their lives for years. I thought I was building a bridge back to them. Turns out they were burning it behind me. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this and where are you from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story too. The road curled like a ribbon through the dense trees, their leaves casting long, dappled shadows across the cracked asphalt. I kept both hands on the wheel, trying to loosen my death grip, but the tension had already locked into my muscles. In the passenger seat, a small bag rustled, a bottle of red wine peeking from the top. A last-minute offering, a ridiculous hope. When the lake house came into view, my heart gave an involuntary jolt. It was stunning in that cold, magazine-spread way. Floor-to-ceiling windows gleaming in the sun, a manicured deck spilling down to the glittering waters of Trillium Lake. Strings of fairy lights floated between the trees, and luxury SUVs packed the gravel driveway like a showroom parade. I parked near the tree line, feeling every bit like an outsider arriving late to someone else's party. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe showing up mattered. I didn't have time to kill the thought before the front door flung open. My mother, Darlene, descended the porch steps in crisp heels, her navy dress immaculate, pearls catching the light with every sharp movement. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't rushing forward to hug me. Instead, she marched toward me, something black and shapeless dangling from her hand. I stepped out of the car, forcing my lips into something approximating a smile. "Hi, Mom," I managed. Without ceremony, she thrust a black apron into my hands. Bold white letters screamed staff across the front. "We're short on servers," she said breezily, as if handing me a favor rather than a humiliation. "Be a darling and help, would you?" Behind her, Ashton sauntered onto the porch, a champagne flute dangling from 2 fingers. He wore a plastic crown that read, "Birthday King" in obnoxious glitter. His grin widened the moment he saw me holding the apron. "Don't trip, Rowena," he called. "Mom would hate for you to ruin the vibe." Heat flooded my face, but my hands acted on autopilot. I tied the apron around my waist, the fabric stiff and scratchy against my jeans. Smile, nod, get through it. The inside of the house buzzed with the smooth hum of wealth, clinking glasses, polite laughter, the mellow thump of background jazz. The kitchen counters groaned under trays of catered hors d'oeuvres, and white-coated servers floated among the guests like well-trained phantoms. Except me. I slipped a tray of sparkling water onto my arm and wove through the clusters of guests. Nobody looked at me twice. Not as family, not even as someone worth greeting. I was background noise. I was furniture. Halfway around the deck, a trio of Darlene's friends flagged me down near the fire pit. Their jewelry caught the dying sun, sparkling as they lifted their glasses in my direction. "You're Ashton's sister, right?" one asked, voice dripping with rehearsed warmth. I nodded, shifting the tray higher on my hip. "And what do you do now, dear?" I opened my mouth, ready to tell them about the thriving event planning business I'd built downtown, the 6-figure contracts I'd closed, the corporate retreats I'd organized from scratch, but the words never made it out. Darlene swooped in, all syrupy charm. "Rowena? Oh, she organizes cute little birthday parties, bake sales, small stuff." The women tittered behind their glasses, exchanging glances of polite pity. Something cracked quietly inside my chest. A tiny fracture, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I smiled stiffly, excused myself, and headed toward the deck railing, pretending to admire the lake. The sun was starting to dip, setting the water ablaze with molten gold. The breeze smelled of pine and wood smoke. I gripped the railing until my fingers hurt, willing the embarrassment to drain from my body. Why had I come? I knew better. I always knew better. Behind me, Ashton's voice rose above the murmuring crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope she doesn't spill the drinks. Poor thing might drown in her own mess." Laughter erupted. I didn't turn. I didn't react. I stared hard at the lake, the water blurring at the edges as my vision prickled. It would be so easy to laugh it off, to pretend it didn't matter, to be the good daughter, the invisible sister, the family footnote. But somewhere deep inside, something old and tired whispered, "Not tonight." I slipped away from the railing, the laughter snapping at my back like a whip. For the first time in a long time, I didn't swallow it down. I let the hurt sit there, real and heavy and mine. And somewhere inside that hurt, a tiny ember flared to life. The evening air was cooler now, and I wrapped my arms around myself as I leaned against the railing, pretending the burn behind my eyes was just from the crisp mountain breeze. Inside the house, the laughter had grown louder, looser, the kind of laughter that spilled out from people who didn't have to think twice about who they hurt. I kept my gaze on the lake, the surface darkening as the last slivers of sunlight bled away. Somewhere inside, someone clinked a glass against a bottle, drawing a fresh burst of cheers. Then Ashton's voice broke through the noise, louder than the rest, dripping with mock sincerity. "Hey, don't forget to tip the help, folks! Rowena could probably use it to pay her rent." A roar of laughter followed, sharp and cutting, slicing through the night air like a jagged blade. I froze. The world around me seemed to tilt for a moment, the railing suddenly too far away, the earth too unsteady under my feet. My cheeks flamed with a heat so fierce I thought they might combust. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe, to stay upright, to not give them the show they wanted. Out of the corner of my eye, movement caught my attention. A woman in a navy cocktail dress, hair swept into an elegant chignon, teetered across the deck on spindly heels. She carried herself like she belonged to the lake house itself, polished, effortless, untouchable. She stopped a few feet from me, glassy smile in place. "Excuse me," she said, waving her empty wine glass like a baton. "Could you bring a few more napkins to the buffet? It's getting a little messy in there." It took me a second to realize she was speaking to me, not as a guest, not even as a relative, but as staff. The apron. I had forgotten about the damn apron tied around my waist. I opened my mouth, the automatic apology rising unbidden, but something inside snapped into place before the words could leave. "I'm not with the catering," I said evenly, my voice sharper than I intended. "You might want to ask someone else." Her smile faltered for a moment, then returned twice as brittle. "Oh, well?" She blinked as if trying to reframe me in her mind. Guest? Staff? Some unfortunate in-between that made her uncomfortable. Without another word, she turned and retreated toward the fire pit. I stood there, the old familiar shame creeping up my spine, but this time it was met with something else. Something angrier. Something heavier. Invisible. That's what I had always been to them. Not important enough to remember, to honor, to celebrate. Just convenient enough to use when they needed a warm body to fill a seat, to pour drinks, to make the photos look complete. I pressed my hands against the railing until my palms ached. I'm not invisible. I'm not their servant. The words repeated in my head, louder each time, drowning out the residual laughter from inside. I thought about leaving, about ripping the apron off, tossing it at my mother's feet, and walking out the front door without a backward glance. I imagined the stunned faces, the whispered gossip, the scandal of it all. But the thought of leaving felt like losing, like admitting they were right about me, that I wasn't strong enough to stay in the room. I was tired of being the one who always left quietly. I inhaled slowly, drawing the cold air deep into my lungs, straightened my shoulders. If I left, it wouldn't be running. It would be a declaration. And if I stayed, it would be on my terms. The sliding door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was another guest or a family member stepping outside to cool off. Their laughter floated through the crack in the door before it slid shut again. I wiped my palms against the sides of my jeans, breathing steadily, preparing to head back inside, to finish what I started, if only to prove to myself that I could. But just as I turned, the unmistakable slice of my mother's voice cut through the murmuring night. "She's always been the difficult one. You know how Rowena is." I froze. A second voice, lower and unfamiliar, responded with a half laugh. "Well, every family's got one." I stood there, hand on the railing, the stars blurring above me, the lake forgotten at my back. The words, casual and cruel, embedded themselves deep beneath my skin like splinters. Difficult. Difficult because I didn't shine the way Ashton did, because I didn't bend to fit the picture they wanted, because I dared to want something different, something better. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, listening as my mother's voice, so sweet in public, so cutting in private, ripped whatever scraps of hope I had left into pieces. I slipped just inside the sliding door, pressing myself against the cool wall, the murmur of the party stretching around me like an invisible web. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe too loudly. Ahead of me, tucked into the hallway near the kitchen, stood my mother and my Aunt Lillian, Dad's sister who always smelled faintly of vanilla and carried herself with the brittle dignity of someone used to disappointment. They hadn't seen me step inside. I should have walked away. I should have spared myself what came next. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, the words unspooling between them like a slow, poisonous drip. "She's always been so sensitive," Darlene said, her voice light, almost pitying. "Honestly, it's exhausting. No matter what you do, it's never enough for her. Always brooding, always needing something." Aunt Lillian gave a low chuckle, the kind that slid under your skin and settled there. "Some kids are just born looking for a problem." Darlene sighed, a sound so heavy it seemed to sag the very walls around us. "At least Ashton knows how to make us proud. Rowena, she just craves attention, always has. It's like she can't stand not being the center of something." The words hit harder than any slap ever could. They stripped away the polite smiles, the occasional invitations, the hollow hugs. They exposed the truth in a way I couldn't deny anymore. It wasn't about tonight. It had never been about tonight. This was a pattern woven deep into the fabric of who we were, or more accurately, who they had decided I was allowed to be. I gripped the corner of the wall until my fingers ached, blinking hard against the sudden sting in my eyes. Sensitive, attention-seeking, a disappointment. The labels fell over me like a funeral shroud, familiar and suffocating. I thought back, uninvited memories flashing like a cruel slideshow. My high school graduation, where Ashton's soccer tournament had mattered more. My first major event contract, barely acknowledged with a distracted, "That's nice, honey." Birthday after birthday, where the silence from them grew louder than any party noise could have. They had never seen me. Not really. Only the gaps I failed to fill. Only the flaws they needed me to have so they wouldn't have to look at their own. I straightened slowly, the apron's ties pulling uncomfortably against my ribs. It felt symbolic somehow. The uniform they had strapped around me, not just tonight but all my life. Serve, smile, be useful, not important. Be background, not headline. Their conversation drifted into other things, someone's upcoming wedding, the cost of redecorating the sunroom, but I wasn't listening anymore. Inside me, something shifted. A small, silent breakaway. A fault line opening up where loyalty used to live. They never intended to see me. The realization wasn't sharp or sudden, it was cold, final. Like stepping onto a frozen lake and hearing the first crack echo underfoot. I didn't belong here. Maybe I never had. I pressed a hand flat against my chest, grounding myself against the rising tide of sorrow and anger. I wouldn't cry here. Not for them. Not in a place where my pain would only become another story for them to chuckle over after the plates were cleared. Outside, the laughter grew louder, swelling into a chaotic chorus. Someone must have announced the group photo. It was tradition after all. Capture the happy family, frame the perfect fiction. I wiped the back of my hand quickly across my face, straightened my shoulders, and forced a smile so practiced it almost didn't hurt. If they wanted a picture, I'd give them one, but not the version they expected. I stepped back into the evening air just as the photographer called out, gathering everyone together on the deck. The deck lights had been turned on now, casting a soft glow over the crowd. My footsteps fell in time with the hush settling over the group as they arranged themselves. Darlene pulling Ashton to the center, laughing a little too loudly, others shifting to flank him, leaving gaps I wasn't sure I was meant to fill. I hesitated at the edge of the gathering, the cool air prickling against my skin. Somewhere deep down, a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, "You don't have to stand where they tell you. You don't have to shrink." I took a slow step forward, not to the center, not to the back, but to the side, where I could see them clearly, where I could be seen if I chose to be. The flash of the camera froze the moment in brilliant, blinding light, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I forced my legs to move across the deck, past the clusters of family members laughing and shifting into position. The photographer, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and a clipboard tucked under his arm, clapped his hands for attention. "Okay, everyone, let's get you organized. Big smiles." I stood a few feet back, half in the shadow of a hanging string of lights, waiting for someone to wave me in, to motion that I should squeeze into the group, to claim me. The photographer scanned the group, squinting slightly. "Is this everyone?" For a heartbeat, there was a pause, a flicker of hesitation. I watched Darlene glance across the deck. Her eyes landed on me, just for a second. She knew I was there. She saw me. And then she smiled that tight, brittle smile she reserved for saving face in public, and turned back to the photographer. "Yes," she said brightly, smoothing a hand down the front of her dress. "This is everyone." The photographer nodded, oblivious. He lifted the camera to his eye. "On 3. No one objected, no one even turned to look for me. Not Ashton, not Dad, not a single relative whose names I had remembered all my life, whose birthdays I had never once missed. The shutter clicked, capturing the perfect family moment without me. I stood there, frozen halfway between existence and erasure, the air thick and unbreathable around me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. I wasn't missing by mistake. I was missing by design. I pressed my fingertips against the rough wood of the railing, grounding myself as a ripple of laughter and applause followed the flash. From a distance, the photo would look flawless, smiling faces, arms linked, a tapestry of belonging. No one would ever know there had been someone standing just out of frame, someone erased with nothing more than a polite smile and a well-timed lie. I swallowed the jagged lump forming in my throat and shifted back another step, further into the shadows. The deck lights cast long golden beams across the ground, and I watched my own silhouette blur into the background. Just another trick of the light, just another detail no one would bother noticing. In that moment, something inside me went still. Not broken, not shattered, but hollowed. Like a bell stripped of its voice. They didn't forget me. They didn't overlook me. They chose not to see me. And standing there, under the fairy lights and the false laughter, I understood something with cold, crystal clarity. This wasn't my family. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. The applause died down. Darlene was already herding people toward the next thing. Cake, drinks, whatever ritual they needed to crown Ashton's night. I turned away before anyone could catch my face, moving through the scattered crowd like a ghost. Inside, the house felt too bright, too warm, a mocking contrast to the cavern opening in my chest. I headed for the kitchen, needing a moment alone, somewhere to collect the pieces of myself that were rapidly falling apart. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped cold. There, sitting squarely on the marble counter, was something waiting for me. My stomach dropped. It was a small white box with a plastic window. Inside sat a cupcake, slightly lopsided, its frosting smudged along the top. No candle, no card, no note, just the cupcake. Forgotten, insignificant, and alone, just like me. A laugh, sharp and humorless, escaped my throat before I could stop it. I slapped a hand over my mouth, swallowing it down like every other hurt they'd taught me to bury. I stared at the cupcake, the cheap grocery store kind you grabbed at the last minute, as an afterthought. Not even homemade, not even picked out with care. It was an echo of the life they had always offered me, a life of second choices, of not quite worth it. The sounds of the party floated toward me again, the clink of glasses, the rise and fall of comfortable voices, the easy joy of people who had chosen their belonging, and chosen to leave me out of it. I stood there, the cupcake between us like some cruel joke, and felt the burn of humiliation give way to something sharper. Rage. Not the loud, fiery kind. No, this was quieter, deeper. A seething, coiled thing that had lived inside me longer than I wanted to admit. I wasn't the one who was broken. They were. They were the ones who couldn't see value beyond their mirror images. They were the ones who mistook cruelty for tradition, favoritism for love. I stepped back from the counter, my decision crystallizing in that instant. There would be no second chances this time. No patient waiting for them to realize their mistake. No desperate clinging to a seat at a table that had never been mine to begin with. I turned away from their laughter and headed back inside, where something sat waiting for me on the kitchen counter. A final insult. The kitchen felt like a stage after the curtains had dropped, bright, hollow, abandoned. I stood just inside the doorway, letting the door swing shut behind me with a muted click. Beyond the glass, laughter spilled across the deck, rising and falling like waves I no longer had the strength to swim against. Darlene's voice sliced through the muffled noise, sharp and falsely cheerful. "Oh, almost forgot. We got you something." Her heels clicked against the marble as she crossed the kitchen, a small, half-crumpled envelope dangling from her fingertips like an afterthought. She smiled, quick and tight, and thrust it into my hand without a second glance, already half turning away. "There you go, honey," she said, like handing me a paper napkin at a barbecue. I looked down at the envelope. It was light. Too light. A whisper of something that barely existed. With numb fingers, I slipped the card free. Cheap cardstock. A flimsy printed design. No weight, no warmth. Across the front, metallic letters spelled out 2 words that gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights. Maybe next year. No note inside. No signature. No handwritten scrawl squeezed into a corner, just emptiness. The words blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the sudden, brutal clarity pressing down on me. Maybe next year they'd remember me. Maybe next year I'd matter. Maybe next year they'd pretend better. Maybe never. I turned the card over as if hoping some secret message had been tucked between the folds. There was nothing. Just the cold indifference of a mass-produced apology for a love that never existed. Behind me, the party swelled. A chorus of laughter and clinking glasses, the easy noise of people celebrating themselves. It didn't matter if I stayed here another hour, another year, another decade. It would always be like this. They weren't careless. They were deliberate. They wanted me small, invisible, manageable. A part of me wanted to slam the card onto the countertop, to make the sound echo off the cold marble and shatter the brittle pretense that still floated through the air like smoke. But I didn't. Instead, I slid the card carefully back into its envelope, as if packing away something toxic, and tucked it into the pocket of my jeans. The corner dug sharply into my hip with every breath I took, a reminder that some wounds you carried whether you wanted to or not. I picked up my keys from where I'd left them by the fruit bowl earlier, the metal cool and steady against my palm. Solid, certain, something I could still trust. I crossed the kitchen slowly, not rushing, not making a scene. I moved through the house like a ghost, invisible even to the people who had spent a lifetime pretending they couldn't see me. Nobody looked up. Nobody called my name. I reached the front door, paused with my hand on the knob. One last chance, I thought. One last chance for someone, anyone, to notice. Nothing. Only the dull roar of a party I had never truly been part of. I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air slapped me awake with its clean, cutting honesty. Pine needles whispered underfoot. The gravel crunched as I made my way to my car, parked where the trees threw deep shadows across the driveway. When I slid behind the wheel, the leather creaked beneath me, familiar and forgiving. The headlights cut a clean path through the darkness as the engine rumbled to life. I sat there for a breath longer than necessary, the cheap envelope burning against my hip like a brand. Maybe next year, maybe never. The steering wheel felt right in my hands, more real than any handshake, any hug, any brittle smile I'd been given tonight. I pulled out slowly, letting the gravel churn under my tires, the trees swallowing the lake house behind me until it was nothing but a memory dissolving into mist. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my heart didn't twist with longing as I drove away. It unfurled. It stretched toward something vast and unknown, something terrifying and beautiful. Freedom. I wasn't running away. I was running toward myself. I tucked the car deeper into my pocket, pressed my foot on the gas, and didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that settled deep in my bones. I didn't speed away like some dramatic escape scene from a movie. I drove slowly, deliberately, letting each turn of the tires on the gravel whisper a goodbye I wasn't willing to speak aloud. The road curled away from the lake house, climbing higher into the hills. The trees leaned in on either side, tall and silent, bearing witness to the shift unraveling inside me. Somewhere between the bend and the ridge, the weight in my chest changed. It didn't disappear. It didn't lighten, but it shifted, from something crushing into something solid, like a hand finally unclenching after years of holding on too tightly. I spotted a scenic overlook just ahead, a jagged cutout in the hillside offering a view of Trillium Lake, the water black and still under the heavy blanket of night. I pulled over and killed the engine, letting the quiet seep in. For a long moment, I just sat there, breathing, feeling, letting the silence settle where all the noise had been. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket. The lock screen glowed in the darkness, casting my face in a cold, pale light. I thumbed through my gallery until I found the photo I had taken earlier, almost without realizing at the time what it meant. The cupcake. That sad, sagging grocery store cupcake, sitting lonely on a paper plate on the far corner of the counter. I had snapped it in a moment of bitter humor, never intending to do anything with it. But now, I opened Instagram. For a second, my finger hovered over the screen. Posting anything felt risky. Childish, maybe. Petty. But it wasn't about them anymore. It was about drawing a line they could no longer erase or step over without consequence. I uploaded the photo. No filters, no fancy edits. Just the cupcake, slightly wilted under 2 bright lights. In the caption box, I typed, "Celebrating peace this year. No chef needed. Simple, clean, true." I hit post before I could overthink it. The image blinked into the feed and disappeared into the sea of curated perfection and fake happiness. But it was there. It was real. It was mine. I tucked the phone into my lap and leaned back against the headrest, staring up at the stars scattered across the ink-black sky. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then the buzz of a notification broke the stillness, then another, and another. Curious, I picked up the phone again. Likes, comments, not from strangers, not from random followers, but from cousins I hadn't seen in years. From old friends who had long ago drifted out of my life, not because of distance, but because of how small I had allowed myself to become trying to fit into a family that never made space for me. "Been there," one comment read. "Proud of you," said another. Little green hearts and quiet affirmations bloomed across my screen, subtle but unmistakable. Support, recognition, understanding. I smiled, not a wide, gleeful smile, but something quieter, something steadier. For once, I didn't feel exposed or ashamed for speaking my truth. I didn't feel like I had lit a match just to watch everything burn. I felt like I had drawn a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I was prepared to stand behind it. They didn't burn the bridge tonight. They had demolished it years ago with every cut, every slight, every cheap card and hollow glance. All I had done was finally choose not to rebuild it. My hands, still gripping the phone, no longer shook. The knot in my stomach unraveled a little more, thread by thread. I wasn't angry, not in the loud, explosive way I once imagined reclaiming myself would feel. I was just free. Almost. I set the phone on the passenger seat, feeling the hum of new notifications vibrating against the leather. The view beyond the guardrail shimmered faintly under the moonlight. The lake was just a dark mirror now, reflecting a sky too vast to contain. I exhaled slowly, savoring the stillness, the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Just as I closed my eyes to breathe it all in, another buzz jerked my attention back. A notification. Different this time. A new post from them. The family account Darlene ran like a polished PR campaign. Curious, I opened it. What I saw hit harder than I expected. A photo of Ashton at the party, laughing under the fairy lights, surrounded by smiling faces. A caption gleamed underneath. "Family is everything. Grateful for real loyalty tonight. Real loyalty." The words twisted like a blade. Subtle, vicious, calculated. It wasn't just a post. It was a shot fired across the bow. I set the phone down slowly, the tremor returning to my fingers. They weren't done. And neither was I. I leaned back against the headrest, breathing deep, trying to savor the fragile moment of peace that had finally settled over me. My phone lay face down on the passenger seat, the world momentarily muted behind a layer of glass and metal. It didn't last. The vibration rattled the seat beside me, a buzz that felt sharper, more urgent than the others. I picked it up without thinking, thumb unlocking the screen with a practiced swipe. The notification hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. New post from Bundy Family Love. Against my better judgment, I tapped it open. There they were, Darlene, Ashton, and Merrick, arms wrapped around each other, grinning into the camera like the past few hours hadn't happened at all. Fairy lights twinkled overhead. The lake glimmered behind them like some postcard-perfect backdrop. And the caption? True family stays strong, even when others walk away. My heart stuttered, skipped a beat, then crashed hard against my ribs. It was a clean, gleaming bullet of a message, aimed squarely at me. I scrolled down to the comments, even though I already knew what I'd find. So sorry you're dealing with selfish people. Some kids just don't appreciate what they have. You're better off without toxic energy in your life. The words blurred on the screen, but I forced myself to keep reading. Forced myself to absorb every carefully curated jab, every polished dagger disguised as sympathy. They were painting me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter who walked away from the family who had only ever loved her. And they weren't even subtle about it. Another ping, a new post, this time from Ashton's personal account. I braced myself before opening it. A close-up selfie of him holding a glass of champagne, the lake house lights twinkling in the background. His smile was easy, his arm slung around Darlene's shoulders like some loyal golden sun. The caption underneath, proud to step up when others turn their backs on the people who raised us. I blinked. Once, twice. The words burned themselves into my mind, searing hot with betrayal. Turned their backs, abandoned, selfish. They weren't just throwing dirt at me, they were rewriting history, twisting the truth until the entire world saw me as nothing more than the bad seed, the problem child, the disappointment they had tried so hard to overcome. And the worst part? People would believe it. Because they were smiling. Because they were loud. Because I had been quiet for too long. The phone slipped from my fingers and landed on the seat with a dull thud. My chest heaved once, twice, as the betrayal settled deep, heavy, and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, grounding myself against the rage that threatened to spill over. They wanted a villain? Fine. But I wasn't going to let them write my story. Not anymore. I sat there for a long, seething moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the woods whispering outside the window like old ghosts. I wasn't crying. Not yet. Not even close. I was furious. The kind of fury that doesn't burn out quickly but simmers, steady and sharp, waiting for the right moment to strike. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket, not to dry tears, but to scrub away the last remnants of the girl who would have swallowed this humiliation and begged for scraps of love. No more. They wanted to play dirty? I could do clean and still win. I picked up the phone again, my fingers steadier now. I closed the app, locking away the lies they were feeding the world. I opened my notes instead. A blank page stared back at me, bright and waiting. Good. I needed somewhere to start drafting the plan forming inside my head. One that didn't involve screaming matches or public meltdowns. I would fight back. But not on their terms. They built their empire on appearances, on curated images and half-truths. I knew where the cracks were. I knew the real stories hiding under those polished smiles. And this time, I wasn't interested in protecting anyone's reputation but my own. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the anger settle into something heavier, something sharper, resolve. When I opened them again, I was already mapping it out. Step 1, get everything in writing. Step 2, shine a light in all the right places. Step 3, let the truth do the work. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had no idea how dangerous a woman could be when she finally decided she had nothing left to lose. I sat there in that small car perched above the black glinting lake, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. I closed the app, wiped my face, and began drafting a plan they wouldn't see coming. The night outside was a heavy velvet black as I leaned back in my seat, the glow of my phone dimming with each passing second. For a moment, I let the quiet settle, let it wrap around me like armor. The world outside the windshield was still, indifferent, and for the first time in too long, I welcomed that silence. I had just begun drafting my plan, beginning the first true act of reclaiming myself, when my phone buzzed again, a text this time. I hesitated before picking it up, already knowing it wouldn't be good. It was from Darlene, a single photo, no words. I clicked on it, my thumb trembling more from the anticipation of betrayal than fear. The image filled the screen, My old bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. Gone were the bookshelves crammed with dog-eared novels. Gone was the twin bed with its threadbare quilt I refused to give up even after college. Gone was the little writing desk where I had stayed up late into countless nights planning futures I thought my family might someday be proud of. In their place stood a brand new treadmill, gleaming under the harsh overhead light. Where my dreams had once lived, now stood nothing more than a machine, cold and impersonal. Beneath the photo, a message followed, almost as an afterthought. Didn't think you were coming back. Figured we'd use the space. No apology, no kindness, just cold practicality. Erasure wrapped in casual cruelty. I sat there, the phone slipping slightly in my grip, my heart pressing painfully against my ribs. Not because they had repurposed the room. No, that part didn't hurt. It was the message underneath it all. You don't belong here anymore. Maybe you never did. I squeezed my eyes shut for a beat, grounding myself in the rhythm of my breathing. In, out, in, out. I wouldn't let them see me break. Even if they weren't here to witness it, I refused to fall apart because of them again. The next blow came swiftly. Another notification. Still staring numbly at the screen, I clicked into the family's social media account again. A full album had been uploaded. Pictures from the party I had fled only hours before. Dozens of shots. Ashton grinning with guests, Darlene raising a glass mid-toast, cousins piled onto the dock, faces flushed and giddy. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. I scrolled faster, desperate and dreading, one photo after another, groups, candids, posed smiles, tag after tag lighting up the pictures, not a single one of me. I wasn't just erased, I had been deleted, as if I had never existed, as if I had never fought to belong. The hollowness that opened up inside me wasn't even grief anymore, it was something colder, sharper, not mourning the loss of family, but mourning the illusion I had clung to for far too long. You can't be erased if you were never truly seen. The thought echoed so clearly it startled me. And once it landed, once it took root, it didn't move. It didn't tremble. It didn't ache. It just was. I set the phone down on the passenger seat, the screen fading to black like the closing curtain on a play that had run far too long. For a few moments, I just sat there, staring at the empty road ahead, feeling the steady, calming pulse of certainty start to thrum inside me. They had made their choices. Now it was my turn. No sadness this time. No desperate need to explain or prove myself. No frantic grasping for a love that would never be offered freely. I was done speaking their language. I was going to tell my own story, and I wasn't going to apologize for any part of it. With a steady hand, I picked up my laptop from the floor of the passenger seat where it had slid during the drive. I opened a fresh document. The blank page blinked up at me. Clean, ready, patient. Exactly how I wanted it. I began typing. Not a rant, not a defense, a declaration, a reclamation of everything they had tried to strip away from me. Paragraph by paragraph, I set the record straight. I didn't call names. I didn't point fingers. I just told the truth. The real truth. The one they had spent years twisting out of shape. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the muscles in my shoulders ached, until the night was bleeding into early morning and the sky outside began to lighten with the faintest hint of dawn. When I finished, I leaned back in my seat and stared at the words on the screen. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was honest. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I had finally gotten them to see me, but because I no longer needed them to. I closed my laptop and leaned back, ready to tell my story in a voice they couldn't silence. The soft click of my laptop closing echoed in the quiet room, a small, final sound that seemed to signal the end of one life and the beginning of something entirely new. Weeks later, that promise to myself had taken solid, tangible form. I stood in the middle of my new loft, sunlight pouring in through the giant windows, bathing the exposed brick walls in a warm, forgiving glow. Portland's Pearl District buzzed faintly beyond the glass. Distant conversations, bicycle bells, the slow hum of a city breathing at its own pace. The loft wasn't huge, it wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Every inch of it, mine. The floors were still mostly bare, save for a secondhand couch I snagged from a vintage shop, a coffee table made from reclaimed wood, and a few framed photographs leaning against the wall, waiting for me to decide where they belonged. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension that had once been welded into my bones finally start to lift, piece by piece. Today was my birthday. Not that anyone from the lake house would be calling, not that I expected a text or a card, or even an obligatory "hope you're well" message tossed out into the void. No, today was mine. I crossed the room to the small kitchen, where a single cupcake waited on the counter. Vanilla frosting, rainbow sprinkles, one bright pink candle stuck proudly in the center. I had picked it up from a little bakery down the street, on impulse, on a whim, on a wave of reckless tenderness toward myself that I had spent too many years denying. I set the cupcake gently on a plate, struck a match, and lit the candle. The tiny flame danced in the late afternoon light, defiant and bright. No lake house, no caterers, no staged family photos. Just me, in a loft that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and wild hope, standing in the sunshine with a cupcake. I smiled, a real one this time, small but certain. "Happy birthday, Rowena," I whispered into the quiet. "You're worth celebrating." The words didn't catch in my throat. They didn't feel like a lie. They felt solid, honest. They felt like mine. I sat down cross-legged on the floor, the plate balanced carefully in front of me, and watched the candle flicker. There was no rush, no audience, no performance, just me, and it was enough. It struck me then how much time I had spent trying to fit into rooms that shrank around me, trying to earn love that was always dangled just out of reach like some cruel prize. How much of my life had been shaped by waiting for permission to exist fully. And now, I wasn't waiting anymore. The family that had erased me, the voices that had tried to rewrite my story, the ones who twisted my absence into a weapon, they didn't hold the pen. I did. I thought of the empty bedroom back at the lake house, the party album with my name conspicuously missing, the way their laughter had washed over my absence without missing a beat. I thought of the way I had swallowed that pain, let it settle in my chest like something inevitable. Not anymore. Their choice was never a reflection of my worth. It never had been. I wasn't broken because they failed to love me, and I wasn't lesser because they chose to leave me behind. Healing wasn't linear. I knew that now. There would still be days when the old ache would creep in, when the memories would surface like bruises I had almost forgotten. There would still be lonely nights when the weight of it all might feel too much. But even on those nights, even in those fragile moments, I would never again shrink myself to fit into spaces too small for my heart. I had outgrown the need for their approval. I had chosen myself. Gratitude swelled in my chest, not for them, but for the girl who had survived them, for the woman who had risen piece by piece, stubborn and scarred and radiant, out of the rubble they left behind. I leaned forward slightly, bringing my face closer to the cupcake. No wishes this year, no desperate pleas tossed into the void, hoping for scraps of kindness, just certainty. I closed my eyes, drew in a slow, steady breath, and blew out the candle. The flames sputtered and disappeared, leaving behind a thin curl of smoke that twisted into the air like a final, silent prayer. I closed my eyes, blew out the candle, and finally, quietly, claimed my place in the world. No permission needed. Sometimes, the hardest lesson we learn is that not every family will choose us, no matter how much we love them. But peace isn't found in chasing what hurts us. It's found in choosing ourselves. If you've ever lived through a family drama like Rowena's, remember, you're not alone, and your worth isn't measured by someone else's acceptance. What would you have done if you were in her place? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful journeys like this. See you in the next story.